Well, good afternoon and welcome to today's ISCA ICAN webinar on the Check and Connect Tier 2 intervention. Today we have Amy Abler from Des Moines Public Schools. She's the Culture, Climate, and Community Coordinator. And before I turn it over to Amy, we're going to keep everyone on mute to reduce background noise. We are recording the session. If you have questions during the presentation or during the webinar, go ahead and type them into the question box on your webinar menu, and we will answer those, or Amy will answer those throughout the presentation. So Amy, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. I chose the format that you'll see today, just taking pieces from some mentor training that we do as a district, and I think that will make the most sense to everybody as far as the basic tenets of Check and Connect. I would also encourage your team, of course, to meet and have very clear data decision-making rules about who would qualify for this intervention and how you view it as a Tier 2 intervention. I know here we look at it as a high Tier 2, low Tier 3, and we can talk about students who are best served in this intervention. There are all 10 of these modules that you go through with mentors for training, and I'm just going to highlight a piece of each of these 10 as we go through. The great thing about Check and Connect is that it is a structured mentoring intervention. It has over 25 years of evidence base behind it, and it does promote student engagement at school with learning, but it is considered dropout prevention because the main focus of the intervention is to focus on school completion. The fidelity of implementation is something that you'd want to consider also as a district as you are rolling it out. Research tells us that 70% of Tier 2 interventions done with fidelity do have successful student outcomes. So ensuring that you have mentors who are trained, that the check is standardized, that you have a facilitator that's helping mentors when they need support with the connect piece, but also that the mentors have regular family engagement is really very important. I know that different people define student engagement differently, but under Check and Connect, it really does follow this definition. Engagement is a commitment and investment. It's learning, but also identification and belonging at school. Check and Connect mentors go through some training about observable engagement versus internal engagement. It's pretty easy for people to see and understand academic and behavioral engagement. Either kids are doing academically and behaviorally well or they're not. What is more challenging to understand is the cognitive and affective engagement of students. So cognitively, how do we know students are invested in what they're learning? And affectively, how do we know that they feel a sense of belonging at school? Some of the internalizing issues become externalized over time, but of course, the role of mentoring is that those internalizing issues don't become negative externalized academic and behavioral issues. So we really try to walk students through that they can do something, to they want to do something, to they belong in a meaningful way in their school community. So student engagement, according to research, does follow some pretty predictable patterns. So when students receive quality instruction and they have the ability to have a successful performance outcome, when that occurs, they do feel a higher sense of identification at school, and they begin to participate more fully in either their class or extracurriculars, or just making healthy decisions about school and school engagement. Therefore, you can see kind of the cyclical nature in a positive way that kids engage. The interesting thing is that a lack of student engagement also follows a pretty set kind of cycle of behavior. So one thing that's very essential to understand or to realize is that dropping out of high school or dropping out of school, period, is very, very rarely a sudden occurrence. That there are signs and missed proficiency opportunities and missed engagement opportunities for quite a long time along the way for some kids before they actually drop out. So they have unsuccessful school outcomes even at elementary level. They begin to emotionally withdraw. So when you think about earbuds in, hoods up, some really quiet internalized behavior is can be indicative of that emotional withdrawal. But then soon they physically withdraw. They're not attending or not going to all of their classes. But then, of course, that leads to more unsuccessful school outcomes. So the role of the mentor is really to interrupt that cycle of non-identification and non-participation. Because we do know that there are some pretty startling statistics and consequences of dropping out for students that have a lifetime impact. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, that you would really want as a building or as a district to identify your data decision-making rules about who meets a threshold in order to have a mentor. But there are some guidelines on early warning signs that can guide the way. But you can see to the point about dropping out is not a sudden situation just by this inability to read at grade level by the end of third grade. Could be your very first indicator that a student needs additional support, but perhaps not waiting for that second failure in sixth grade, but intervening a little more quickly. When mentors are working with students, we really steer them away from discussing any status risk factors, and we teach mentors about that pretty specifically. Obviously, there are many things under status risk factors that students can't alter on their own. So to mentor or discuss those in depth really don't lead to changed outcomes. However, a deep investment in the removal of barriers and conversation around the alterable risk factors, so whether or not they're attending, what their attitude is towards school, whether they are in any extracurricular activities, the behavior that they're choosing to demonstrate, and are they working outside of school? Are their credits accruing? Are their grades proficient? So the core belief of the program is that at a Tier 2 level, when you identify students who are disengaging, that the role of the mentor is there to intervene, and that intervention follows some pretty standardized checks but also is flexible enough to get student needs met so they're able to cognitively and affectively begin to re-engage with their school community. Desirable mentor characteristics are important. They're important because you want to be certain that the mentor not only has that belief in students, but more importantly, the belief that problem solving with students and helping students solve their own problems is key. And so during the course of mentor training, we go through different exercises that demonstrate that fostering a dependence on the mentor, or the mentor kind of becoming the end-all be-all fixer of things for students, is not the direction you want to take that relationship. It is really predicated on problem solving and predicated on students creating goals and strategies that they can employ, whether the mentor is present to help them or not. Of course, the question that has come up before is, say we have 20 students that we would like to have a mentor. Do we just tell 10 staff members, hey, we would like you to be a mentor? The program would really say no, that one of the most important aspects of being a mentor in the building is that the adult really wants to do that. Check and Connect is a 2-year mentoring process with a student, and so the cooperation, the collaboration, and the persistence, or Check and Connect calls it persistence plus, that it takes to move through this process with a student for 2 years is it's imperative that the mentor really wants to be deeply engaged with that student for that period of time. There's some profile that pieces that you go through during mentor training that, like I said, more clearly delineates the role and the strengths that the mentor would bring to that student-mentor relationship. It's also important that mentors are accountable to that weekly interaction with the student, every few weeks with the family, but they are increasingly, more and more a part of that student's persistent, consistent academic support. This is just a little quote from a student that had a mentor, and it really just does exemplify the fact that for some students it takes a number of months before they really truly gravitate toward the mentor and that mentor's role, but that 2-year process does cement that relationship, and also the gradual release toward the end is important as well. So the unique thing about Check and Connect is that it's twofold in that it is a very lockstep process on the check side. So the mentor is systemically monitoring student engagement and educational progress every week. And so every week there is a mentor-student conversation about what their attendance was that week, what their behavior was that week, and how they did in their classroom that week. The role of the mentor is really to focus specifically on how is your current behavior or how are your current choices leading you to a successful school outcome? We know that kids have a variety of other issues going on, and the mentor can help navigate some of those or connect students to other resources. The role of the mentor really has to be very much articulated, that the student outcome focus is always on improving engagement and academic success. When you check the data with students, which the mentor goes through and prepares for the meeting before sitting down with the student. So it is all there in front of the student to discuss together. So that gives an opportunity for the student and the mentor to really take a look at, are there barriers that can be overcome? So maybe there are several tardies, but that was a transportation issue. That once transportation is solved, they wouldn't see those tardies again. However, if the tardies are some sort of lack of engagement or student choice, that data would help talk about what is the pattern of behavior or the pattern of choices that you're making that's keeping you out of instructional minutes. Also, the Check and Connect process gives mentors some, here are the basic interventions, and here's what every kid receives who is in the program, versus now we have maybe some escalation of some issues in various areas, and then some more intensive intervention strategies can be employed. The nice thing about Check and Connect is that there are materials and guidelines and some other resources that help mentors be a little bit more flexible in what those intensive interventions might look like. So the mentor always uses the check data every week for recognizing patterns, celebrating success, showing students that when they set a goal the previous week and were successful in meeting that goal, that there's a celebration of that. And then thinking about a goal for the upcoming week and whether the type or level of intervention for the upcoming week needs to be changed. So the connect piece, like we said, is that formal, also happens during that formal meeting time where after the checked data has been gone through, then there's kind of a personalized intervention plan for the week that is targeted on a more successful school outcome than the week before. So in that very basic intervention, as I discussed, checking the data, providing feedback to the student, discussing school and the importance of school, the importance of being in school, and then facilitating a problem-solving process with students that really helps them think through their own choices. As I said, for more high-risk situations, going through a process of who do I reach out to for more help, more support, making referrals, or a more intensified, individualized intervention plan. This is just a snapshot of what a data sheet might look like. Just helps track and monitor over time. Basic intervention, intensive interventions, if they are being employed, and communication, not only with the student, but also home and with other school staff or outside agencies. The mentors also receive guidance on how to have the best homeschool communication possible, how to respond appropriately to parental questions or concerns, and how to work with parents in a partnership to encourage home support. A piece of the mentoring process that are the practices, some of the practices that we go through in mentor training is getting some of that reflection of feeling, paraphrasing, and repeating or rephrasing. So we coach the mentors through a bit of time in the mentor training on these 3 skills. We really talk about the fact that the student needs to be talking 80% of the time and the mentor needs to be talking 20% of the time. That after the student talks, it really is a repeating or rephrasing or paraphrasing, because just like in counseling, it's that cognitive process that the student needs to go through in order to create a plan for him or herself. It is not the mentor providing the plan and the goals and the outcomes and handing it to the student. So the reflective listening piece is something we practice because it is pretty key component to helping the mentor understand the role of supporting the student through their own problem-solving process, not being the fixer of the problem. So this is just quite basic, and I like this problem-solving process simply because it's very applicable for kids of all ages. But sometimes, as you know, we just need to ask the student to just stop and think. So after you've been a good reflective listener, the mentor's been a good reflective listener and understands the feelings that might be underlying some of the issues, this is still a cognitive coaching exercise. So stopping and thinking, let them talk through a variety of choices they can make, but really having them just choose one thing they want to do differently. And then having them do that, and then the next week talking about how that choice went for them. It's also really important thing that you stress in mentor training is that even as the adult or as the mentor, you're fairly unsure that the choice they make is going to work for them. It is crucial that you support that student in making that choice and letting them, as long as it's not, terribly detrimental to them, but letting them make a goal and make a plan to carry out their own choice. It's really through that learning that gradually over time they internalize this process and they internalize the problem-solving process. So we want to be sure that we're always, modeling for them as well. If it is something that might be challenging for them to do, and that particularly they acknowledge that's going to be hard for them to do, that mentor is equipped to teach explicitly and model some strategies that would align with the student's goal. And then really a huge component of Check and Connect mentoring is goal setting, going through the SMART goals process that the student does not set goals or plans that aren't specific or measurable. They're not realistic, and they're not timely or time sensitive. And so while they might have, for example, a big goal for a whole grading period, really walking them through what is the process for, say, if that's a 9-week period, what are the short goals each week that need to be accomplished to meet that big goal at the end of the 9 weeks. Every district or every building would have a coordinator for Check and Connect. So that's really the person who makes sure that the mentors get training, that they have all the materials they need, they have access to the technology that or the data that they might need in order to be effective and efficient. But also it's someone who's comfortable holding mentors accountable for the fidelity of the mentoring program. So, are all the students receiving their weekly mentoring? Are all families receiving communication from their mentors every few weeks? Just some of that internal accountability and that internal support is significant for those mentors to feel as though they're being successful. The coordinator might also possibly have that role on a team that is deciding where Check and Connect fits in the whole schema or in all of the different offerings for interventions that you might be trying. Where does this one fit and for which students and why? So the great thing about Check and Connect is the flexibility of it, that it does seem to be very effective no matter the function of the behavior that a student is exhibiting. So in that, it can be a really effective offering in that whole Tier 2 menu if other interventions are more predicated on specific functions of behavior. The mentors also, when they come to training, I have noticed they're always very curious, like, well, how am I matched with kids? Or how do kids know that they've been selected for this? Some of those very basic introductory questions. So we do support mentors in building rapport with students that they maybe have never met before, and explain Check and Connect in a positive way. But again, just like at the beginning when I shared that it's very important for the mentors to want to be mentors, it's also very important that the students want to be mentored, so that they want to be mentees. So maybe someone else, like the counselor or classroom teacher, might talk with students a little bit before they would meet the mentor, just to kind of warm them up to the idea of having a mentor. By and large, we have seen kids in our district pretty thirsty for this and really open and receptive and desirous of being included in a Check and Connect mentoring program. It's also important that the family and the Check and Connect mentor have a relationship as well. And the emphasis really is on a partnership, really is valuing that family as the expert of their child, and that the mentor is never in any type of role where a family or a student would feel like things are being dictated to them or there wasn't a choice about services or about support, but that this really is seen by the family as a valuable partnership. There are many resources that Check and Connect provides, like letters to families to introduce the mentoring program, but also online resources, print materials, just depth of support materials that are available that really demystify, if you will, all the components of Check and Connect and make it a really easy to implement and useful intervention. That is kind of the end of the standard presentation, I would say. So I am curious what questions people might have about implementation or working with students or getting this started.
So you can go ahead and enter your questions there in the question box, and I will give them over to Amy. Amy, how long is the training? Where do you sign up, and how much does it cost? And where are they held?
All good questions. So the AEAs, I believe, all would have a contact for Check and Connect mentoring. It really kind of came to the state under the School Climate Transformation Grant. The mentor training, I will give you the University of Minnesota answer. So the mentor training is 2-day full training. Now at DMPS we do that a full training with staff who maybe are from a community organization or AmeriCorps or some community members who are coming to the district to provide this mentoring as a something that they haven't done before, or they don't have a lot of depth of experience in working with families and students yet. I will admit that we pare that down a bit when teachers or other staff have indicated that they would like to mentor, and we know that some of the things in the mentor training that would be redundant for teachers or counselors or other staff, we have either, we touch on or we eliminate, but we don't emphasize. So that training is quite a bit shorter than that 2 days. As far as cost goes, I think if you connect with your AEA, I don't know that there's really a cost associated with the training, but I think that would be a specific question for your AEA to answer.
And how do you handle background checks for your community mentors?
Those all go through the HR department. So, yes, every individual who volunteers or is employed with the program goes through that HR process and gets all that background, all the background checks done via that way.
Do you use Check and Connect in your elementary settings in your district?
It has taken off more in with older kids, sometimes because we have a few more people there that are getting it started. But yes, we have, for example, AmeriCorps workers who come through mentor training, and they do provide services in our elementary schools.
Okay, back to the background check. There's a follow-up question. Are the background checks paid through the grant, or does your district absorb those costs?
I'm sorry, I don't know that answer at DMPS.
Okay. How have you handled, or has there been any pushback from parents? Like if a student is identified as needing this program and they reach out to the families to get on the same page, have the families pushed back? How has that been handled?
Well, I think that for students and families who don't want to engage in this process, because it is a 2-year process, we haven't, it isn't forced upon the student or the family. But I will also say that we haven't had, to my knowledge, this support be turned down with any, in any large measure.
Are there any other obstacles that you've experienced, either with just the district itself or with parents and students? Any other obstacles?
I think that the obstacle that we have here at DMPS is just the number of buildings that we have. And so, when a student leaves one school that has where their mentor serves, and they in district transfer, so they go to another building in our district, but the mentor doesn't have the capability of following the student because they have a building specific role, that can be a bit of a hurdle. Or maybe the student goes to a school where there isn't a mentor, and so that relationship is severed. I know that it's been something that we would like to overcome. However, I would hope that having the mentor in that building would be a protective factor for that student that might encourage them to not in district transfer if they have a choice, but to remain connected to that building.
How do you recruit your mentors?
Well, it's really Check and Connect, I think, is important that it's a grassroots effort. And so I'm a district trainer. Christy Eckert is a district trainer. And so sometimes it's just doing infomercials, so to speak, at PD and to our Tier 1 teams and our Tier 2 teams. It's getting in front of administrators and sharing it as an intervention program that's on the menu, so to speak. And then they kind of take it from there. They ask staff if they'd be interested in being a mentor. And if they get a few people that are interested and willing to do that, we regularly have trainings, and we get them that training. Some of our larger buildings, particularly high school buildings last year, 15 or 20 or more staff members have gone to Check and Connect training. And then just in their buildings, they are figuring out kind of how to connect kids and adults and get the process going. So grassroots is key, and all the players, both students and staff, wanting to build this relationship this way is the most valuable component.
Anyone have any additional questions for Amy? Okay. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up then there today. Amy, thank you so much for sharing this information and about the program and your successes in the district. I think I'll summarize. You said everyone interested should contact their AEA for information, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So your AEA contact would be your next step if you're interested in learning more about how to implement Check and Connect. So Amy, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Everyone else, thank you for joining us, and have a great day.
Thank you.